All right. Um, I tried streaming this yesterday. My voice feels better, so we'll try again. Same point. It says perhaps this difficulty arises partly because eating is a pleasure, constituting one of the greatest goods of human existence. This is at least when Lu Wenfu's novella *The Gourmet* suggests, as it grounds its subtle repoliticization of food on the persistence of an aesthetics of eating. In this story, the questions raised by the appeal of beautiful food, refuse to disappear even in society's darkest hours, and even against all of the best efforts of the Chinese asceto-Marxism to banish luxury from the people's desires. In this respect, it resembles Gu Hua's Feast for the Mind, in which gustatory pleasure is especially figured with reference to dog meat, that deliciously greasy local specialty that moistens yin and strengthens yang, and warms the body on wintry days. This is a food that is strongly class marked, especially for working men on the streets. It marks a great snack and keeps them going in long hours. By confining his story to one small town in which nearly everyone belongs to the same social stratum, earnest leftists classifiers are only able to find 20 some members of the five bad class categories. Gu Hua was able to depict the entire social world as composed of those who, in effect, enjoy eating dog, but in more cases, class differentiated over places, and in the hands of authors who are less comfortable with a simplistic populism, tastes vary a great deal. The Gourmet, a novella set in Suzhou and written in 1984, only a few years after Hibiscus Town, develops an aspect of the political problem of eating that is mostly avoided by the two works discussed above. Refusing to reduce the question of food to any simplistic definition of basic human needs, this narrative constantly invokes and complicates the pleasures that eating brings, showing that commensality is almost, by definition, riven by the displacements of discourse and the antagonisms of an asymmetrical social world. Can carnal pleasure be separated from material exploitation in today's world? This is the problem that the gourmet takes up and understandably fails to resolve. In the process, however, the story traces in the unsettled moral habitus, as it were, of post-socialist Chinese eaters. Early in this delicious novella, the idleness of a pre-liberation land is described as follows. Once Zhu Jie had settled himself in a room in the back house after lunch. He was like an invalid in the hospital. He did nothing whatsoever under his own power. Waiters brought and poured tea. Masseurs drew water. He didn't even have to remove his own shoes. Was unwilling to lift a finger because he witlessly preferred to concentrate all his efforts on that stomach of his. He felt that since eating was a pleasure, digestion was also inexpressible, refined beauty. One should devote oneself to knowing it, especially experientially, and not allow externals to disperse one's attentive powers. The best way to concentrate this power was to soak in warm water, evacuating all thoughts, stilling all memories, just feeling the delicate movements of the stomach, such that the whole body had an unspeakable ease and sweetness. That was as wonderful as tasting fine food, though the two experiences could not be exchanged. Throughout the story, the world of food, cooking, and eating is evoked in this sort of vivid prose. Lu Wenfu succeeds in stimulating the senses, while at the same time examining the politics of what? What am I supposed to say? What? Why? My friend just sent me a mad face emoji. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about that. Succeeds in stimulating the senses while at the same time examining the politics of production and consumption in everyday life. Thus, his description of Zhu Ji Ye after-lunch routine in the bathhouse exemplifies the dual tone of the whole story, while indicating in his narrator's contempt for the landlord class. He also, uh, he also, and in the same words, evokes the reader's carnal identification with these hedonistic parasites. The narrator, Old Gao, is the manager of a state-owned restaurant and a conscientious socialist cadre. His nemesis, Zhu Jie, a distant yet relative, is a gourmet, an idle member of the former landlord class. Gao hates Chu with a righteous passion. He claims to despise the food business and the parasitic eaters who take it seriously. Yet, in his account of a whole history of the revolution and the People's Republic, is told through images of oral consumption. The narration is stuffed with food words, and eating, cooking, buying, and transporting of food accompanies every step as the plot develops. Hostile actions are phrases as swallowing, roasting, and slicing. Pain is sour, pungent, or searing, and emotions and events are reported as bitter or sweet. Bodily pleasure is especially sweet, and detailed sensory images are constructed to articulate it. At the same time, an intimate portrait of the whole old city of Shujiao is accomplished through a minute rendering of its local cuisine, and the actions takes place in streets and lanes full of food, vendors, and the sounds and smells of cooking. This is realistic writing in which an experiential quality is fused to the coordinates of time and space. Zhu Jie must get up early to catch the first batch of over the bridge noodles at a certain Suzhou shop, justifying this obsession and with sententious remark. Quote unquote, the art of eating is just like the others of other arts. One must firmly control the relationship of time and space. He even hires the narrator, Gao, when still a youth, to run all over town collecting snacks for him, and his cronies to eat while they relax in a tavern. Thus, he turns the boy into an expert on the food map of pre-liberation Suzhou. Years later, when Zhu has become an expert in beautiful food, he lectures on this aesthetic of time and space. The east is sour and the west is pungent, the south is sweet and the north is salty. Everyone says that Suzhou dishes are all sweet, but this is a misconception. In addition to Suzhou's sweet dishes, we emphasize most meticulously is the adding of salt. Salt enhances all the flavors. If you forget to add salt to fish lung soup, for example, it is bland, utterly tasteless. The moment you add salt, everything happens. The fish lungs freshen and the ham becomes savory. The water shields smooth. The bamboo shoot crisps. Although the salt brings out all the flavor, it is not itself noticeable. The adding of salt is not rigid. It depends on the people and the timing. At the beginning of a banquet and the people's mouths crave salt, subtle flavors would be wasted on them. When people have just begun eating, their mouths are still plain tasting, but their bodies need salt. As dish follows dish, though each should have a little less salt. If the banquet has 40 dishes, the last soup should be entirely without salt. People still find it tasty after consuming so much food and drink. They have met their need for salt, and what they need at that moment is water. This argument is reminiscent of one that is frequently made in teaching Chinese medicine. The administration of Chinese therapy should be flexible in responding to the specific character, place, time, and precision, and person. In fact, the same terminology is used yin, shi, ye, ren. A little Chinese lesson for you. Ye being, wait, no. Ye shi must be time, and ye ren must be person. I know ren is person, but I don't know what yin is. Or and it's been a while since I've studied Chinese. Clearly, in keeping with the argument in Chapter 1, this gourmet wants to demonstrate how food artfully managed can mobilize those powers that produce pleasurable experiences. But Lu Wenfu is not content with this kind of intimate body politics. He insists that food is also political at the level of societal production and consumption. The morals and politics of production and consumption, collective duty, and personal desires can be infinitely extended through the allegorical form of eating. The exploitation of bathhouse workers, allegorical form of eating, the exploitation of bathhouse workers noted in the quote above, everyone should at least be required to remove his own shoes, is only one of the many ways in which Juche pleasures are depicted as riding upon the labor of the masses. At one point, the gourmet's wife, who is laboriously cooking to serve his pretentious guests, says of him that this man is nothing but a gilded chamber pot. All he can be is a mouth. That is an eloquent image of the consumer as a moral cipher. Rather than earning his food and drink by participating in some form of production, the landlord Jouzier is a parasite. Even after the new government has confiscated his properties, he receives a stipend to compensate him for the loss of that income. Like a chamber pot, he has no place in any work process. His sole function is to receive. The gourmet affronts the sober, egalitarian morality of the narrator by eating for pleasure, not for health or even to cement social ties, rather than producing a, a socialist citizen who serves the people. His eating produces only the private ephemera of bodily pleasures for a person who doesn't know how to work. Worst of all, he and his like are so besotted with the fetishized values of food, flavor, presentation, psychological effects, that they cannot perceive the exploitation that is inherent to its existence. A labor theory of the value of cuisine would at least acknowledge the legwork of an errand boy, the chopping and frying done by a wife or a mother. Jujia's wife points out while she is hard at work in the kitchen that restaurants cannot produce food as well as good cooks working at home for special occasions, because the best food requires weeks of planning and preparation. Her husband never sees the labor-intensive side of his obsession, but old Gao is reminded of the everyday asymmetries of the working world while he wants to entertain a friend from out of town. He asks his wife to get some food and prepare it for them. Though it is usually his mother who does the cooking, his modern young wife retorts, "What, have you forgotten your own advice? You said that if a young person wasted all her time in the kitchen, she'd never have any prospects. The young woman with prospects doesn't even know where the oil bottle is." With all of his commitments to the working classes and yearning for a communism beyond exploitation, Gav has forgotten how much he depends on his mother. Xu Jie displays a similar but more extreme form of gendered selfishness at the nadir of the Cultural Revolution, when he and old Gao have been linked in the imaginative accusations of a disgruntled waiter. All right, I'll continue. As follows in the book, it says, the neighborhood committee could hardly fail to make some gesture. It was pretty easy for them to make me stand at the doorway to their offices in the morning, confessing my crimes along with the Zhu Jie and Kong Bixia. It had come to this that Xu Xie and I were standing up together, standing in front of the neighborhood committee wearing a placard that the taste of this was harder to bear than my being made to stand on a stage as a criminal. Kong Bixia couldn't stew for long like this, standing there with her head half shaved and wearing a placard that saying, "Female Special Agent." She was a person who liked to dress up and who valued her dignity. In addition, that blasted Jujie had the effrontery to volunteer the confession that he had seen Kang Pisha peeling the paper labels from the foreign canned goods received from her ex-husband in Hong Kong and pressing them in the glass-topped table. Then he said he saw her burn them at the time of the campaign against the four olds. The secret messages were supposed to have been on the back of the labels. Kang Pisha blushed, then glared, then became agitated. After standing for less than half an hour, she toppled to the ground, her face flushed, unconscious. As those, so then the book continues, as though to become, as those thought to be guilty of crimes against the people, cook slowly in the heat of distasteful attention, often seriously contemplating their own errors, the gourmet can only seek to shift the blame to his own wife and devoted cook. The ideal that the cans of food should be the bearer of a counter-revolutionary code draws attention to the way in which political purpose also resides in everyday necessities. But from the point of view of the narrator, this conflation of food and politics offends the Maoist sensibilities. He has long cultivated, assisted perhaps by fictional works like The White-Haired Girl. As far as Old Gao is concerned, there are no coded messages outside the desperate imagination of the gourmet. In a politically sensible world, he seems to think food does not speak, and eating should just be eating. Shortly after the denunciation, the narrator and his family are sent to the countryside, where they eat together they eat tough old hens and drink a bad liquor for some years. Zhu Xie continues his old life relatively undisturbed, quote unquote, still living at number 454 and eating relatively well. Unlike Hibiscus Town, this Lu Wenfu novella is uninterested in extreme hunger, relying on the differences through which social distinction can be figured in everyday life. At one point, or for example, Gao persuades his worker friend Ah Er to give up the degrading but profitable work of pulling a rickshaw. But since the old work Ah Er can find to replace his old job is canal dredging. His family eats and drinks less well. The roast goose and bottle of wine disappeared. For a time, the old gal learns his first lesson about the practical disadvantages of ideological correctness. Even the three hard years are not described in the apocalyptical language some authors have favored. Instead, this period of famine provides an occasion to which agents of differentiated the honest cadre narrator from the self-indulgent aesthete, Zhu Jie. Thus, old Gao is offered a cartload of pumpkins, not exactly a gourmet food in China, that has come in as a windfall to his loyal friend Ah Er. The two of them the two of them hoped that they could cook pumpkin will that the cooked pumpkin will help nourish Gao's wife, who is suffering from malnutrition induced enema. Back to health. The gourmet Zhu begs for a few pumpkins for himself and is enlisted to help push the cart. His nemesis having become rather pitiful in these hungry times, old Gao wonders whether his old landlord might have finally realized the value of labor and the folly of his parasitic ways. The words they exchange while moving the pumpkins prove otherwise. All Zhu can talk about is food, as he narrates his own feast of the mind. He describing both past and future delicacies to his unwilling listener. Even in the depths of a national famine, he still thinks like a gourmet, fantasizing the humble pumpkin into an implausible 80 treasure pumpkin cup, stuffed with unattainable goodies. Figures like this remind us that not only have amounts and styles of food varied in modern Chinese history and been unevenly distributed among Chinese people, but so have daily acts of eating, built and rebuilt the asymmetrical um, built and rebuilt the asymmetrical connection among people. Just as we have never finished eating and must always return to the social relations of the table, so the gourmet constantly reassesses the relationship between the gourmet and the moralists, the landlord and the cadre. Food flows between them, repetitively. Why can't I say this word? Repetitively, repetitively, raising the possibility of commensal fellow feeling and then reasserting the inequalities that divide them. Perhaps it is important that this is not a power differential. Jujie is richer than Gao throughout most of the story, but he is always on the margins of real social power. Old Gao takes responsibility, wielding power in the context of his socialist work unit, the state-run restaurant, and suffering the consequences as the revolution continues. Throughout the story, he claims to shoulder the burden of administration reluctantly, but we must presume that the life of the communist cadre, especially when it was informed by the revolutionary fervor, had its own pleasurable rewards. Still, old Gao repeatedly gnashes his teeth in frustration. The one person whom he has no control is his parasitic kinsman, Zhu Jie, the unredeemable essential consumer who always seems just beyond the reach of reforming power. This problem of power is made very clear as the gourmet ends. The still dutiful cadre, now known as Director Gao rather than comrade, is trapped into a banquet at Zhu Jie's house, where a group of ideologically suspect cronies of the gourmet urge Gao to hire their bloodsucker host as a consultant in the state restaurant. One narrator manages to leave before he is required to commit himself. A serving of three-in-one duck intervenes at the crucial moment with all his old animosity toward Zhu Jie revived. He hurries off to a wedding party at Arquhar's house. At the wedding, all is as it should be, quote unquote. This was a joyful world. No false courtesies, no hypocrisy, no talking of extravagance. The courtyard was full of people, cracking melon seeds, eating wedding candy. Gao's 1-year grandson is there, being spoiled by all the adults who offer him the best tidbits and goodies, but he won't eat ordinary Chinese hard candy. Someone finds a chocolate bar, an expensive, foreign-style sweet, which the baby takes to instantly uh, takes two instantly, much to the delight of the adults. This baby's really clever. He knows how to eat good things. This is too much for old Gao. He suddenly began to explode. When he grew up, he too would be a gourmet. Though all my life I had been unable to control that Zhu Jie, I could still control this little creature. I reached out and took away the chocolate bar and forced a piece of hard candy into his mouth. The child started to scream. Everyone there was stunned. They must have thought that this old guy had gone completely crazy. And there the story ends. The evil of exotic pleasures had made its way into the bosom of the narrator's family, corrupting the future that the little grandson figures. The formal powers enjoyed by the conscientious socialist cadre are shown to be helpless against a stubborn bodily coding of inequality, one that inhabits taste buds and appetites, even more than hearts and minds. It appears that from the beginning the gourmet had been drawing on deeper and more permanent sources of human significance than his ideological revolutionary kinsman has perceived. Ideals we are led to think can at times become insanity. Down to earth eating, however, only produces garden variety gluttons and beggars. This ending then is not unlike that of Hibiscus Town. Maoist ideology has become a form of madness. But food, even the difference between cheap hard candy and expensive chocolate, is only natural. But the text as a whole is more complicated. Reading Lu Wenfu's novella as gourmets, um, vicariously enjoying the delicacies consumed by Zhu Jie, the first batch noodles, a fish fillet fried in the shape of a squirrel's tail, snowflake chicken balls, crab meat with a cabbage heart, rice flour balls in osmanthus broth, a fresh tomato stuffed. Okay, all this food we have participated in a certain pleasure of the text, recovering the genteel daily life of an early Shujiao and relishing the imagined tastes of its many local delicacies. Reading in league with old Gao, the narrator, we have rejected the self-indulgent and exploitative implications of knowing how to eat well, and we have shared his hope for a future in China which no one will be able to use others in the service of such ephemeral pleasures. Reading from a position outside the text's own voices, we are reading along with the author, or along with the broader condition under which he writes. We weep for a Chinese suspended between the chocolate of a rapacious global capitalism, a system and elite language that relentlessly separate the economy that must feed the people from the politics that might hear their social division, and the three-in-one duck of a feudalism that will not die, partly because it offered such refined pleasures to the few. The gratifications attendant on high political purpose now appear ludicrous, having been replaced by the undignified but natural scramble to consume. If there were subtle gratifications that accompanied the regime of asceto Marxism, they have now become overwhelmed in a frenzy of consuming new pleasures between these poles. Neither the mass line of Maoist practice nor the simplest reward of family and community life offers stable answers to the question of how to eat both ethically and with pleasure. That is, how to eat well. All right, let's get back to it. Old Gao himself appears pathetic at the end. The revolutionary ideals for which he tried to stand for 35 years have long ago gone sour. He has repeatedly been accused of making ideological mistakes, while his old enemy Zhu has almost entirely escaped reformation. While I Air's proletarian family wedding celebrates immodest and prosperity achieved since the revolution, the gourmet at his banquet down the street is indulging in his unproductive and exploitative appetites more excessively than ever. Most unbearably is that such appetites have themselves become a kind of expertise worthy of monthly stipend at the state restaurant, worthy of praise in an infant gourmet. Excuse me. Typical of Lu Wenfu's gustatory tropes, the three-in-one duck that distracts banqueters at Zhu Jie's house, allowing old Gao to slip away, is an eloquent materialization of reform-era social difference. The labor-intensive dish is a game pigeon stuffed in a chicken stuffed in a duck, then put back together to resemble a whole duck surrounded with quail eggs, arranged to look as if the duck had just laid them. No wonder that these gourmets paused a moment in their politicking to wonder at this apparition. Three-in-one duck is remote indeed from the meat dumpling that had for decades been in the good times food of the common people. It takes a true expert to make this dish. Though dumplings are made at home by the whole family, it incorporates mostly exotic materials. No mere pork, flour, and cabbage here, and it is all protein, eschewing any leavening with staple grains or vegetables. It both recalls and, in its splendor, occludes those social hierarchies in which bigger fish eat smaller ones, and rich people drink the life's blood of the poor. Dumplings were a food that the Liberation era government could promise and at times almost deliver to all. Three-in-one duck was never meant for anyone but gourmets. An aesthete of the body, Zhu Jie has slipped through, under, and around all the labels, evading the ideological entrapments, and affected the lives of so many during the Cultural Revolution and the anti-rightist campaigns that preceded it. Okay, back to work. The anti-rightist. He has never attempting anything beyond the boundaries of his own sensation. He doesn't even know how to cook. Zhu Jie can never be held responsible for anything dangerous. He can be accused of nothing worse than being a bloodsucker, a mere mosquito in the transforming body of the masses. His story figures that that pleasure is for historical analysts. For the historical analyst, neither old Gao nor the party theoreticians above him can figure out how to control a human who lives only to eat. As the ambiguous ending of the gourmet suggests, the opposition of the aesthete to the ideologue cannot be resolved Both um, both figures appear ridiculous in their excessive emphasis on one aspect of alimentary practice. Xu Xie's obsession with his stomach, which enjoys abundance, and old Gao's concern for the people who require austerity, if all are to eat are forever. Sorry. I'll start at the beginning of the sentence. Juju's obsession with his stomach, which enjoys abundance, and old Gao's concern for the people, who require austerity if all are to eat, are forever incommensurate and coex- always coexist. The strength of Lu Wenfu's writing is that how he offers a more complex text for our delectation than either of his main characters could ever produce. The gourmet serves up history, suffering, and morality all along with the imagination, enjoyment, and beauty. It is not only about eating, but it performs it, leaving the reader with both tingling taste buds and few indigestible lumps. The text is at once political and aesthetic, satisfying the senses and unsettling the intellect. It truly performs a feast for the mind. The reader becomes an embodied guest at the feast of images and memories, just as likely to enjoy flavors and companionable talk. Companionable. I've never heard that word before. Companionable talk. All right, anyway. Companionable talk to suffer hunger or anxiety as the characters in the story. In this respect, Lu Wenfu's undermines all the opposition that drive his narrative, producing instead a polyglot mix of enjoying sociable, antagonistic, desiring political bodies. Lu Wenfu's strategy in The Gourmet is in keeping with the aesthetic resistance mounted by writers in the mid 1980s to protest Maoist politicization of literature. The resistance in question opposed itself to the thorough politicization of all language and thus all experience by the state. As the reform period advanced, writers experimented with ways of using language that could infuse new significance into a modern Chinese language that had become thoroughly imbued with nationalism. Marxism and class struggle words indeed needed to find new referents. This required writers to build a context within which text could mean something besides what the state had for decades been saying. The Gourmet participates in this aesthetic resistance at two levels. Zhu Xie is parodied as an aesthete, but Lu Wenfu also redeems the bleakness of a social vision with an overtly aesthetic writing style by invoking intimate experiences of alimentary pleasures for the reader. The Gourmet interpolates a body and self that in the early 1980s was just beginning to appear. Lu Wenfu's rejection of the excesses of a state-led political logic is especially evident in this episode, in which a Red Guard restaurant worker cooks up ludicrous conspiracy charges against the narrator. This mystery story scenario involves the labels on cans of food sent from Hong Kong and the gift of pumpkins during the hard years. But Lu's story, while it seems to share with its readers a desire for an escape hatch, a place where eating is just eating, offers no space for a meal that can really be free of the political. He can only retreat toward the use of language that distracts us with its nostalgic and gustatory beauty, and an idiom that, while still invoking power and inequality, stands in contrast to the ponderous moralizing of Maoists' propaganda, like Gu Hua, who used Hibiscus Town to dramatize a reform-era opposition between material needs and political idealism. Lu Wenfu, along with many authors who lived through the latter decades of the Mao years, sought to remove the life of the body from the oversimplification of state politics. But beautiful prose is not enough to answer the questions posed by the revolution and incorporated into eating itself by generations of Chinese citizens. I realize I've yet to highlight anything, so probably gonna take a couple of minutes and go back and read. Man, yeah, this is probably boring for you to watch. I'm sorry. But I did go pretty fast through like 10 pages, so the way it is when you read nonfiction. Okay. Yeah, I guess I should check that and I'll get back to you, but maybe not since they're doing it and it's public. We can, you go to those? I can't. Now, where was I? Okay, I was here. I'll begin reading again. I should have just finished the chapter. There was like one page left. My bad. In fact, Lu Wenfu appears to realize that it is not just food, but beauty itself that comes at a considerable social cost. After all, sorry. In case I get a message, I can see it. After all, his hometown of Suzhou is known as a beauty spot throughout China, in the world, a heaven on earth. Renjian Tiantang. Its extraordinary gardens and parks. When I visit, its extraordinary gardens and parks. When I visited in 1983, just about the time the gourmet was being written, had suffered from years of neglect and misuse. But restoration was underway, mobilizing the skills of master woodworkers to rebuild pavilions and arcades, and organizing gardeners into societies to cultivate rare plants and re-landscape um, miniature vistas. The work required and the expense were everywhere. But, oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said but. I think I lost where I was. The work required and the expense were everywhere. Everywhere made obvious in signs explaining the renovations. Many sites had collection boxes for donation. Lu's novella itself refers to an earlier stage of labor in the service of Xu Zhao's beauty when Ah Er gets a job after giving up his rickshaw. His work involved dredging Xu Zhao's narrow canals. It was very hard work, but also very significant. The old society had left us with sludge, clogged waterways. The sludge needed to be changed into clear, flowing water in order to make this Venice of the East live up to its reputation and to make this heaven even more beautiful. This was an aspect of our revolution. Ah Air, however, must work much harder in his new job of beautifying Suzhou than he had when he was facilitating Shujia's eating. By pulling a rickshaw and bringing home only 3 caddies of rice a day, the production of lasting beauty, in other words, is a much bigger job than the service work that makes life easier for a consuming class. The inexpressibly refined beauty of Xu Zhe's very private digestive process is quite a different thing. Socially, than the loveliness of a town with the peaceful gardens, well-kept streets, and clean waterways that help to sustain life for its residents. Perhaps for a time in the 1980s, writers like Lu Wenfu and their vast number of readers in a reforming China thought that the beauty was enough. But the history that had led readers and writers to this apparent solution had not disappeared, nor could it. The deep satisfaction offered by the white-haired girl, in which an oppressed and silent majority of rural producers at once finds voice and power, but opts for continuing and eventual class struggle, and the desperately desired material simplifications worked out in Hibiscus Town, while nevertheless failing to banish ambiguous memories or incorporated into the aesthetics of the gourmet. This last book, very this last book's various characters and their adventures say much about a specifically Chinese sense of the past and its capacities to haunt everyday life. Old Gao, for example, came into existence as a moral being with the New China and the Communist Party. And some of his most carefully crafted descriptions as the narrator are devoted to the desperate pow- pro- as the narrator are devoted to the desperate poverty of Sujiao's post-liberation beggars and workers. Um, the text makes it clear that he speaks from the early 1980s as perspective of a still loyal communist. So he does not wish to forget how dreadful the old society was. although he has seen the error of certain leftist excesses. While the restaurant's business is concerned, he cannot let go of an ingrained Maoist egalitarianism. The Gourmet also offers us less vocal characters with an even firmer hold of morality. Ah Air's willing worker and Kang Bi Xia, the hard-working and beautiful cook married to that gilded chamber pot, Xu Xie. These characters, unlike the book's protagonists, do not theorize food or eating. They simply get by services or performing the productive tasks essential to eating. In a sense, both Gao and Zhu are eaters of state grain, although the more incidental characters of Ah Air and Kang Pi Xia are not producers of staple food. They nevertheless earn their keep. Thus, the latter two conclude the story on the sidelines. They hold the old viable but moral authority on offer, but theirs is a silent voice. More interesting, of course, and most problematic is Xu Xie. This gourmet emerges by the end of the story as quite a talker. Through from the point of view of old Gao, his words are empty, but this is the only change his character undergoes. As an eater, Zhu is always there, always the same. His very existence forges an equivalence at the level of the body and despite and desire. The old society before liberation and the reform era in which it is glorious to get rich. Lu Wenfu thus treats him as expressing an inherent tendency in human social nature. His selfish approach to oral pleasure is built into the problem of eating itself. This trope suggests yet another naturalization in greed is natural, and ultimately it is madness. They must have thought that this old guy had gone completely crazy to try to control it for the sake of the collective and the name of an idealistic politics. Um, then the author starts talking about his grandfather. It says, "My grandfather, a high school Latin teacher, always used to resolve battles amongst his young grandchildren by saying, 'De gustibus non disputandum est,' or 'concerning tastes there can be no disputing.' His technique was brilliant, no doubt the result of his classical education. He would sophistically reduce our antagonisms to mere questions of taste and then pronounce the ultimate adjudication. There can be no disputing. The materials discussed in this chapter have presented many disputes about taste, expressed deep-seated historical antagonisms that admit of little adjudication, at least in theory, but these arguments have tended to leave taste itself untouched. When bodily experience itself is thus naturalized historically, difference is occluded. The many and changing ways in which lived bodies have come into existence cannot be perceived when pleasure, desire, and greed are seen only as the inevitable and unchanging conditions for any politics. In practice, pleasure and greed undergo profound alterations as circumstances change. As we shall see in the next chapter, and as we suggest in chapter 1, the politics within which these carnal realities are produced has been very explicit in post-socialist China. The bodily and social idioms that charge food with collective values far beyond the nutritional have been well and variously explored by writers in several eras, although the fictional works I have explored here almost completely ignore it. We also saw in chapter 1 that there is theoretics of flavor and power. In other words, a language for historically contingent pleasures available in the techniques of Chinese medicine. What connects these two idioms of embodiment would links the social or critical dimensions of post-Maoist thought to the therapeutic or phenomenological aspects of the the medically theorized life, chapter 3, it will be possible to bring together the reflections of the great fiction writers of Mo Yan and some of the theoretical resources of Chinese medicine to explore these connections. This conjunction does not, however, resolve to the contradictions addressed and in sense heightened by the white-haired girl, Hibiscus Town, and the gourmet. Despite all efforts to make peace on the terrain of taste, all that can be seen in China as elsewhere is continuing battles. All right, that's the end of the chapter. So, same as always. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. This chapter was particularly interesting. I don't know. Let me flip back to the table of contents and see maybe if other portions are worth reading aloud. I probably the next section is probably worth reading aloud. It's another 50. It's pretty long. It's 50 pages. Wait, no. No, it's shorter. That last section was 50 pages. This section is like 30, 40 pages. And yeah, I'll probably read the next section, the next 40 pages, and then I'll read the rest in my head. I'm going to go back and read the beginning up until this point, the first 79 pages. But I'm not going to read it aloud because my voice is hurting. So that's it. Thank you.